So my dream was just as weird as anybody else's, I guess. My dream was to be a writer, and I don't know why, because I didn't know any writers. I didn't know the names of any writers. I didn't have any books at home. We didn't have a public library on our side of town. The city council said at that time, they don't need a library on that side of town. They don't read. They don't even speak English. And so I was hungry for books. I don't know where the hunger came from, but I was hungry for books. And when I was 11, they put a library on our side of town, and my mother would walk me there once a week to check out the maximum number of books they would allow, 5. I would take them home and I'd read them all through, and then I'd be done, and I'd be disappointed because there was nothing left to read. And I'd flip back at the book again to see if I'd missed something, and sure enough, there's always a boring page in every book. Right behind the title page, there's that page with the little fine print. You know, it says boring things like ISBN:0-0562, you know. And so I read through that too. Maybe there was something interesting there, and no, it was pretty boring, except I found out that every one of those boring pages had a little segment that said Random House, New York, or Little Brown, New York, or Doubleday, New York, and I began to think that if you wanted to be a writer, you had to come from New York. And I was from the west side of San Antonio. Gee, if only I had come from New York. If only I knew about those wonderful places over there, you know, of world impact, and places of significance like the Statue of Liberty and Central Park. And so I decided I was going to be a writer anyway. And I started my first novel. And it said, one day, while walking through the middle of Central Park, comma, in New York, comma, and then I was stuck. That was the end of it. I had no clue what you could do there, what was there, what it looked like, what would happen. That was the end of my brief but distinguished life as a writer familiar with New York. And I thought, if only I were like those other people. If only I were like those ideal students the schools are always looking for. If only I were like them. If only I had been raised in New York, I might have had something to write about. I mean, we don't even have a Central Park. We don't have any kind of park at all on my block. At the end of my block, instead of a park, we have a tortilleria. It's a tortilla shop where an elderly woman would sell corn tortillas for a penny each, and she was old. She was so old. She could barely make it to the front counter. Don't think grocery store like what you think grocery store. Think home, where the people live in the back, and the front room has a counter, and that's where they sell the corn tortillas, and she would come up to the front counter. She would barely make it to that front counter, and she would get to the front counter, and I would be in shock because I'd never seen anybody that old still breathing. And the little kid from down the block would cut line in front of me and say, "Siete tortillas, por favor." And he would slap his 7 pennies on the counter, and she would start to count out his 7 pennies one by one, and she would go, "Oh no. Dos." So it took her a while to do the counting. And while she was counting, I was staring because I'd never seen anybody that old. And when I stared, I noticed that her face looked just like the charcos in San Antonio, the mud puddles that had been dried up from drought, that were now cracked and dry, and instead of mud, they were little brown squares. And her face looked just like those little brown squares. And I said, I understand. Now I understand why she and the dirt in the mud puddles look exactly alike, because they're the same age. She is the oldest breathing creature on the planet. And she would say, "Tres." And the sunlight would come in from the window and hit her hair, and her hair was so white that between the light of the sunlight and her hair, it looked like they were sending vibrations back and forth. They were talking to each other. They were saying, "Hey, ¿cómo te va este siglo? Que last century was a bummer. Está bien gacho. This one's okay." They were talking to each other, her hair in the sunshine. And I said, I know why. I figured it out. They're the same age. They got the same birthday. She is the oldest breathing creature in the solar system. And then when she was right around 6, I looked at her hands. And her hands didn't look like they were made out of hands. They looked like they were made out of corn masa that she'd been working all day long to make those tortillas. And I said, oh my God, she's older than Mexican food? No civilization would be possible anywhere in the universe without Mexican food. That I know. So she must be the oldest breathing creature in the universe. And just about then, she got to siete. She took her 7 pennies, put them in the pocket of her delantal, and turned around very slowly to yell to the back of the house for somebody to come up and help her turn the tortillas. Because when you're the oldest breathing creature in the universe, you deserve a little help. And guess what? She turned so slowly, and then she yelled, Mama! And her mother came out and helped her turn the tortillas. And I thought I had nothing to write about. I had nothing to dream about. I had nothing to speak about. I wasn't one of those important people. We have a ton of kids in this nation right now thinking they're not one of those important people. They'll never be one of those important people. Thinking they have no chance, that what they have to say isn't important, that what they dream about isn't important or isn't doable or is crazy, and it's not crazy. Their dreams and their hungers are given from the miracles of the universe. They are individual. They are born inside them. I don't just use my own crazy ideas to back this up. There's an amazing psychologist, James Hillman, who's written a book called The Soul's Code on Commitment and Calling, in which he analyzes the studies of even identical twins, like the amazing Juliana and Joaquin Castro. And he finds that their passions are different. They're similar in many things, but their dreams and their passions are different. Something goes into the person's soul at birth, and that guides them. Whether they're in the middle of a ghetto, a barrio, a wealthy college preparatory school, or dropped out of high school, they have dreams inside them that are sacred. And your job, the job that I am so grateful for, is that you have decided to listen to who they really are, not who society thinks they should be. I commend you, and I plead with you not to give up this struggle. I plead with you to respect the sanctity of what's born inside each human being and their right to an education. If you're going to be in San Antonio another couple of weeks, there's even going to be a great panel out at Palo Alto College by a brilliant young musician who asked the question, is multicultural education a civil right? Is multicultural education a civil right? If the education you receive is what allows you to understand and reach what's happening in the educational world, is it a civil right? In a democracy in which we're supposed to take part in the decisions? I think it's a brilliant question. I think it's a wonderful question. An education that speaks to who each of us is. And in order to make that happen, we can't legislate multiculturalism. We can't tell the students which cultures will be represented. They have to speak it. It has to come from their own creation. For those of you who are wondering, yes, I did become a writer. And miracle after miracle, I don't know how exactly. Through the Chicano movement, and the women's movement, and the civil rights movement, and all kinds of literary movements, and back garage presses, and presses on the kitchen floor, and poets who decided that what they had to say was too important, whether the outside world was going to listen or not. They were going to get together and have their readings. And all of this happened over years, and the years accumulated. And things went. They were written, they were published, they traveled. Some poems traveled without my knowledge. I would get a phone call about a poem from somebody who saw it in something else, who saw it in something else, who saw it in something else, saying, can we use this poem? And the interesting thing was there was one piece that was published more than anything else, and it wasn't about New York. It wasn't about Central Park or the Statue of Liberty or universal world issues or human struggles. It was a little tiny 10-line poem about the world's oldest woman and her mother making tortillas in my West Side Binder. Just a simple little poem. And it started showing up in the high school textbooks, the American literature textbooks, next to Robert Frost and Carmen. And they would call me and they'd say, can we use your poem Ali in the upcoming anthology of American literature? And I'm like, Ali, what did I write about Muhammad Ali? Yes, sure, you can write it. Could you give me the title of that poem again? Ali por la calle San Luis. Allí por la calle San Luis. The title's in Spanish, the poem's in English. But anyway, it was about the woman in the tortilleria and her mother. And it showed up in Europe, and it showed up in college textbooks, and it showed up in the city buses in Austin, and it showed up on the sidewalks in Houston, and it showed up in a yearbook for a very, very distinguished college preparatory school on the East Coast. It showed up in a lot of places, not because if you want to be a writer, you either have to grow up in New York or in a block with a tortilla at the end of it and a very elderly woman. It showed up because it came from who I really was, who I really authentically was. And I believe that our best and our brightest, our most brilliant, our most creative, our most devoted, dynamic, inventive, innovative leadership skills, our brilliance comes from being who we authentically are. Raised the way we're raised, given what we're given. It is ours. As San Antonio prose writer Robert Flynn says about the people of Chillicothe, Texas, where he grew up with another 3 people. These are my people. I know them. This is who I write about, and no one can tell me better what comes from their heart. So as you work with our young students, as you facilitate systems that are open to their dreams and their hungers and their realities, listen for who they are. They know who they are. They know who they grew up with. They know what their dreams are. And you have allowed a space for that to be respected.